Drop a like and do share. Leave your comments and do not forget to subscribe for more videos.
Good morning, students. Welcome to adptable.com, your online portal to the world of invaluable knowledge. During our last discussion, we started discussing on the topic of present value of uneven cash flows. We tried to understand that what exactly uneven cash flows are, how are they different from annuities, why are they so very practical and relevant. So let's have a quick recap before we may proceed with our discussion. So uneven cash flows are known as uneven cash flows, or they are termed as uneven cash flows because of their non-identical pattern. Unlike the annuities, they are not fixed in nature. They are not predictable like the annuities. Students, in almost all the financial decision making areas, we find that more often than not we do come across uneven cash flows, wherein the future cash flows cannot be predicted with geometrical precision. It cannot be said for sure that the cash flows shall be identical in amount and identical in terms of their occurrence across the various number of years in the future. So most of the decisions which we find, which finance managers undertake in terms of the corporate financial decision making process, they lead to a generation of an uneven stream of the cash flow. So they're uneven because their quantity or their amount of the cash flows, they differ across number of years in future. So let's go through a few points which shall help us in understanding the concept better. Most financial decisions lead to the generation of future stream of cash flows. Obviously, as we have discussed earlier also, it happens more often than not that in the present day time we are committing our funds into a particular project, into a particular investment avenue, into a particular asset, which are expected to lead to a generation of the futuristic cash flows. So it is the basic nature of the assets, whether they are the long-term asset, they are the medium-term asset, they are the short-term asset, that irrespective of their time frame, assets are always expected to generate a future stream of revenues for the company. So assets are those investments which are in possession of the company. They may be capital assets, they may be your investments into the current asset, whatever the case may be, but they are always undertaken with a view of generating a future stream of the cash flows. But since we have also seen that the future is unpredictable, the macroeconomic conditions are unpredictable, the business environment cannot be predicted with geometrical precision. So at times it leads to a condition wherein the quantum of the cash flows which shall be arising out of the assets cannot be laid down with 100% surety. No one can predict that every year a particular amount of the fixed cash flows are going to occur. In some year the cash flows may be more, in some year the cash flows may be less. So that fluctuation factor is always there when the question of the future cash flow generation comes to the fore. Now, unlike annuities, such cash flows are unpredictable as well as uneven in nature. We have also discussed this point, students, that they are not annuities. The future uneven cash flows, they are not annuities, they are not fixed in nature. Unlike the annuities, they are non-fixed in nature and their occurrence might take place at any time during the year. Like the annuities, they cannot be predicted that yes, a particular amount shall be, a fixed amount shall be received for n number of years, either at the beginning of the year as annuity due or at the close of the year as ordinary annuities. Now, investments into capital asset and generation of revenues therefrom year after year is a classic example of such cash flows. The cash flows thus arising are unpredictable and uneven as well. This point also we have discussed right now, students, that capital assets or any kind of an assets which have been undertaken by the company, they are expected to generate a futuristic stream of cash flows, because if assets are not generating any cash flows, then they are termed as a non-productive asset. Such assets eventually turn out to be very cumbersome for the companies. So although the assets are in the possession of the company, they are under the ownership of the company, but still the most important part, the most important criteria which assets are required to fulfill is their capacity to generate a future stream of the cash flows. But since such cash flows are subjected to market conditions, operating risk, business risk, or another macroeconomic risk, some international risks, international market not responding properly at the time of a global turmoil, like the condition, the current prevailing condition all over the world, we are finding that various countries, they are adopting protectionistic stand. They are closing their doors towards other countries, so they are trying to protect their own domestic economy. But the thing is that since the advent of the LPG era in the early 90s, we have always tried to adopt an export-oriented model in which most of the domestic countries, they were transcending the domestic borders, and they were moving more into the foreign markets. But if some kind of a geopolitical shock or some macroeconomic shocks are coming from some of the foreign countries, that do impact the cash flow pattern for the domestic countries. So they are students, they are such kind of a risk that no matter how much they are being quantified, how much they are being hedged against, they cannot be nullified, they cannot be zeroed out completely. They always prevail, and such kind of an prevailing under the cover risks, they always pose a threat towards the predictability of the cash flows. So with such kind of risks which are prevailing, assets are always under a pressure of performance, and no matter how superlative quality the asset is, how astute the finance manager is, how robust or how foolproof the corporate strategies of particular companies are, due to certain inherent risk, due to certain systematic risk, the cash flow pattern always remains unpredictable. So the question of uneven cash flows are very much natural in the modern day business. The unpredictability quotient is a normal tendency that are concerned with the cash flow pattern. So if the cash flows are uneven, if the cash flows are fluctuating, so that is quite a normal trend, that is quite a logical thing to happen whenever the business is operating under a stiff competitive environment. And as we have already discussed, students, that capital budgeting decisions or making an investment into a capital asset happens to be a classic example for our uneven cash flows. So it becomes highly imperative for the managers to calculate the present value of such uneven cash flows so that they can take a prudent investment decisions. Obviously, students, since we know that the business activities are taken up with a going concern basis, so it means that irrespective of the conditions, irrespective of the challenges, businesses are always taken up with a very long-term view, and it is as per the going concern concept only that the companies do make huge investments into the capital assets. Now, the thing is that, as we have already discussed earlier also, since business activities are fraught with risks, since business activities are fraught with some such kind of uncertainties also, some volatilities also, so a finance manager cannot shy away from the responsibility of not taking any risk and try to play it safe, because it is not possible. If because such kind of an regressive policy will seriously impede or hamper the growth of the company, and the future wealth creation can never take place. So finance managers are expected to work within the boundaries of risks. They will have to take some calculated risk, they will have to take some prudent decision making. As I've used the word calculated risk, it means that that finance managers are not expected to take reckless risks. They are not allowed to take some over aggressive risk, which might again be detrimental for the companies. So the finance managers are expected to take prudent financial decision. They are expected to make some very well thought of strategies in order to tackle those risks. They have to hedge themselves properly, and in light of this, once again the present value calculation plays a very important role, because the present value calculations, they help the managers, they are a handhold the managers, they provide them with a very important tool, which I've already seen, that they help the managers through the discounting method. They aid the manager in converting the future unpredictable cash flows using a particular discount rate, in converting them to their comparable value to the present, and on the basis of the present value of the future calculations across an required rate of return for n number of years, it helps the managers in taking more sound decisions at whether or not a particular decision is really qualified enough to be taken at T0 or at present. So students, the present value calculation always helps the manager in taking a more prudent investment decisions, because we have already seen, we have already discussed, and of course we shall be discussing about it in our later stages also, that capital budgeting decisions call for a lot of brainstorming. A lot of statistical tools are being used to assess the predictability, to assess the future unpredictable cash flows, and they need to be converted to the present value, and then they should be compared against the cost of the asset to see whether a particular asset should be taken up or not. Because students, we know that capital budgeting decisions are expensive, they are irrevocable, they are irreversible, they involve a huge amount of cash outflow, and the most important part is that the cash outflow take place at the present day, that is T0, while the future expected revenues which are supposed to be generated out of the long term asset, they take they take a very long time frame, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the line minimum. So the finance manager should be capable of predicting the future for 10, 15, 20 years, that is a long term future. He has to take a decision keeping into mind the uncertainties which might crop up against such a long time frame. So over here, the present value calculations, with the help of some more statistical tools and techniques, they help the managers in taking sound investment decisions that whether or not a particular asset should be invested into or it should be left alone. Now, what is the formula for calculating the present value of future uneven cash flows? The formula which you can see, it is very, very simple. The formula for calculating the present value of future uneven cash flows is quite simple to understand and apply. Now, take a careful look at this particular formula, students. PV, that is the present value. Present value is equal to F1 upon 1 plus I to the power of 1, F2 upon 1 plus I to the power of 2, F3 upon 1 plus I to the power of 3, F4 upon 1 plus I to the power of 4, so on and so forth till it reaches Fn upon 1 plus I to the power of n. So what exactly we are doing? So can we see that is it a stream of cash flow? Yes, it is. Each and every cash flow is representing a pattern. It is a stream of the cash flows, because the cash flows are occurring across each and every year till the nth number of year. But the second question is that, are these cash flows annuities? No, they are not annuities. Why? Because these cash flows, that is the cash flow for first year, second year, third year, fourth year till the nth year, these cash flows are not following a systematic pattern. They are non-identical, they are not fixed. These cash flows are not the fixed cash flows, they are fluctuating cash flows, they are uneven cash flows. So we can also say that each and every cash flow represents a lump sum cash flow which is being earned in one particular year. We can also try to understand this thing by the present value of the future stream of uneven cash flows is nothing but it is a sum total of lump sum cash flows which are taking place every year. These are the lump sum cash flows which are taking place every year. Else we can also try to understand it by this way. The present value over here in the equation, it represents the present value of the future cash flows which are taking place every year, but the only thing is that they are uneven. So each and every cash flow represents an individual identity. They are not the same from each other. They are in itself, they are a package of a individual lump sum cash flow. Each and every cash flow, students, it is a package of an individual lump sum cash flow. So the sum total of all these individual lump sum cash flow, the sum total of the present value of all these individual lump sum cash flow will be the present value of the future stream of the uneven cash flows. The present value shall be the sum total of the present value of all the future cash flows which are uneven. Now, a careful look at the formula shall reveal that although the cash flows are occurring every year, they are not being treated as annuities, and every single uneven cash flow is being discounted individually and finally summed up. So this is the same point which we discussed right now, students, that a careful look into the formula shall reveal that each and every cash flow, although they are being summed up together, they are non-identical, they are not annuities, they are not calculated on the basis of the presumption that each and every cash flow is same. Rather, each and every cash flow is non-identical, or rather it is different from each other for every n number of years. So we can say that this particular formula also represents the fact that it is the present value of the individual lump sum cash flows which are originating every year. Now let's try to understand this entire formula with a very simple equation. The equation says that Mrs. Jenny has an option of receiving 1000, 1500, 800, 1100 and 400 at the end of the first through 5 years. So Mrs. Jenny is an investor who has been offered an investment avenue wherein she is expected to receive this cash flows at the end of every year for the first till the next 5 years. So for the first year she shall be receiving 1000 USD, for the second year she shall be receiving 1500, third year 800, fourth 1100, and at the last year, the penultimate year, she is expected to receive 400 at the end of the first 5 years. How much shall be the present value of her investment if a required rate of return is 10%? The question is pretty simple. Mrs. Jenny, she is an investor in question who has been provided with an opportunity to make an investment at T0 or at today, against which she shall be receiving these cash flow across the next 5 years. So we can see that all these cash flows are non-identical from each other. They are different from each other. None of the cash flow represents a uniform pattern. The only thing is that her required rate of return is 10%. So the discounting rate which she shall be using in order to calculate the present value of this future probable cash flows is 10%. So 10% will be the required rate of return against which she shall be discounting her future cash flows which she is expected to receive from her current investment. So the question asks that how much shall be the present value of her investment. So we need to calculate the present value of her investment. Now, before applying the formula, let's refresh our memory. Let's refresh a few points. The 10% over here is not being used as a compounding rate. Although this is the required rate of return, we are not using at a compounding rate. Why? Because we have to calculate the present value. We are not interested in calculating the future value. So the entire cash flow pattern, the uneven cash flow pattern which has been given over there, they represent the future probable cash flow which Miss Jenny shall be receiving. So this 10% needs to be used as a discounting rate. The 10% student shall be used as a discounting rate, with the help of which we shall be in a position to calculate the present value of each uneven cash flow and sum them together and or add them up together to arrive at the present value of our Mrs. Jenny's investment. So whatever present value we get, that present value shall be the present value or the value that Jenny shall be having with her at time 0 if the future cash flows are being discounted or they are being reduced to their present value using 10% required rate of return as a discounting rate and not as the compounding rate. And regarding discounting rate and n number of years, we have already discussed, student, that in the case of compounding, higher the I and longer the n, more will be the impact of the increasing impact, additive impact, more shall be the future corpus, the future value shall be more substantial, the amount shall be. On the contrary, in the case of the present value calculation, higher the discount rate and longer the n or the time frame, the lower and lower shall be the present value of the future investment. So this 10%, so the present value calculation shall be taken up under the consideration of 10% required rate of Jenny, which has been put up by Mrs. Jenny. So now let's look at the calculation by applying the formula. The formula says PV is equal to F1 plus 1 plus I to the power of 1 plus F2 upon 1 plus I to the power of 2, F3 upon 1 plus I to the power of 3, F4 upon 1 plus I to the power of 4, and F5 upon 1 plus I to the power of 5. Now, students, a closer look shall also reveal the fact that these each and every cash flows, that is 1000 for the first year, 1500 for the second year, 800 for the third year, 1100 for the fourth year, and 400 for the penultimate year, that is the fifth year. In effect, they are also individual lump sum amount which we shall be receiving across all the years for the next 5 years. Once again, students, these amount 1000, 1500, 800, 1100 and 400, they are individual amount. They are the individual lump sum amount which Mrs. Jenny shall be receiving across the 5 years. So in total, we can also say that this present value also represents the present value of the future lump sum cash flows which are being reduced to the present value using 10% as a rate of discount. By applying the formula, for the first year it is 1000 upon 1.10 to the power 1 plus 1500 upon 1.10 to the power 2 plus 800 upon 1.10 to the power 3 plus 1100 upon 1.10 to the power 4 for the fourth year, and for the last year it is 400 upon 1.10 raised to the power 5. Now you can find that the individual formula, that is P is equal to Fn by 1 plus I to the power of n, which we used for the lump sum calculation, the same formula is being used over here. The only difference is that each and every lump sums are being added together in order to arrive at the present value of the future uneven cash flows. So my dear students, the future uneven cash flows also represents the individual lump sum amount which the investor shall be receiving all across the years for the n number of years down the line. Now students, try to have a look over here. What I have done, I have taken 1000 out of the outside this reciprocal point and I have written it individually 1000 into 1 upon 1 plus 10 to the power of 1. Again, let's recap, students. Since it is a discounting rate, so 1.10 is not being used as an increasing power, as an increasing exponential positive power. It is being used as a reciprocal, which shows that the actual effect is diminishing in nature. So 1000 is not being multiplied by 1.10 to the power of 1, unlike the compound interest. Rather, it is being divided. Rather, 1000 is being being divided by 1.10 to the power of 1. So in effect, this means that as and when this discount rate increases, suppose it is 10%, if this discount rate becomes 12% and this 1 becomes 2 years or 3 years, or if both the terms are increasing, both means if I is also increasing as a discount rate and N is also increasing, then more severe will be the reducing effect that shall be have on 1000. So this is one small exercise I want you to practice by yourself. This is the simple example in which we assume that the discounting rate is 10%. So you work out the same question, by yourself by assuming this discount rate as 12% or 13% and increase the 5 years to the 7 years or 8 years time span. Then try to calculate that what exactly will be the present value. Even if you don't change the number of years, keep it constant at 5 years, but change the discounting rate from 10% to 12% or 10% to 14%. Then try to see what will be the impact of the increased discounting rate on the present value. Obviously, you shall be seeing that the present value which you are getting against a discount rate of 10% shall be much lower what you shall be getting against a rate of 12%. Why? Because once again, student, this is instead of decreasing the discounting rate, you are increasing the discounting rate. So the moment we are increasing the discounting rate, and since this discounting rate is being used as a divider for 1000 is being divided by an increased discounting rate, the present value is bound to come down. And so if each and every cash flows are being discounted using a higher discount rate, the present value of the sum total of the future lump sum cash flows is bound to be lesser or lower than what you shall be getting against a discount rate of 10%. So please do this exercise by yourself, keeping all the variables constant, keeping all the future values constant at 1000, 1500, 800, 1100 and 400. Keep the timeline also constant, keep it for 5 years. Just change 10%, just change it from 10% to 12% or 14%, whatever the case may be, but try to make it more than 10%. Try to increase the discount rate and at first try to discount these future cash flows against 12% and then try to discount these future cash flows by 14%. If you want, you can also try by 15% and 16%. Then you will find, and if you plot a graph, you will find that the present value is continuously decreasing. The present value of the future investment against a higher discount rate is completely decreasing. Secondly, you can also test your knowledge by reducing the discount rate, keeping all the variables constant, that is 1000 USD, 1500 USD, 800 USD, 1100 USD, 400 USD. Keep them constant, and keep the 5 years also constant, but instead of using 10% as a discount rate, try to use 7% or 6% as a discount rate. You will find that the present value of the future lump sum cash flow shall be more than what you are getting against 10%. So if you undertake these two exercises, you will be very much crystal clear with the concept that by changing or altering the discount rate either on a higher side or on the lower side, the present value what you shall be getting changes drastically. Now, 1 upon 1.10, 1 upon 1.10 to the power of 2, 1 upon 1.10 to the power of 3, 1 upon 1.10 to the power of 4, 1 upon 1.10 to the power of 5. So my dear students, neither the cash flows are annuity in nature, nor you find that there is any changes taking place in the discount rate. The discount rate is also constant. The number of years are changing here for the 5 years. So each and every cash flow or the present value is representing the present value of the future lump sum cash flows. The only thing is that these lump sum cash flows are taking place every year till the span of 5 years. So now there are two approaches, students. I hope you have taken a careful look towards this entire working. Now we proceed with this. Now, students, over here I'm writing that 1000 into 0.909, 0.826, 0.751, 0.683 into 0.621. You might be wondering where exactly I got these figures from. You might be wondering where exactly I got 0.909, where exactly I got 0.826, 0.751, 0.683 and 0.621. There are two methods of getting these figures. These figures are extremely important. These are the present value factors, and these present value factors are extremely important, students. So pay careful attention. As I said, there are two ways from which I got these values: 0.909, 0.826, 0.751, 0.683 and 0.621. So again, getting back to the original working, as I said, there are two ways. The first way is conceptual and the second one is straightforward. So far the conceptual when framework is concerned, you might be seeing that keeping 1000 and 1500, 800, 1100 and 400 alone, I have written it as 1000 into 1 upon 1.10 to the power of n. So somewhere or the other, I am dividing 1 by 1.10. So if you divide 1 by 1.10, you will get 0.901. If you divide 1 by 1.10, you will get 0.909. Secondly, I have divided 1 upon 1.10 to the power of 2, 1.10 square. 2, why? Because it's second here. Now, if you divide 1 upon 1.10 into 1.10, it means the square of 1.10. If you divide 1 by the square of 1.10, you will get 0.826. If you divide 1 by the square of 0.10, you will get 0.826. Now again, if you divide 1 by the cube of 1.10, you will get 0.751. Once again, students, if you divide 1 by the cube of 1.10, you will get 0.751. In the same fashion, if you divide 1 by 1.10 to the power of 4, so it means 1.10 into 1.10 into 1.10 or into 1.10. If you divide 1 by 1.10 raised to the power of 4, you shall be getting 0.683. You shall be getting 0.683. Now, if you divide 1 by 1.10 to the power of 5, it means 1.10 into 1.10 into 1.10 into 1.10 into 1.10. If you divide 1 upon 1.10 to the power of 5, you shall be getting 0.621. I hope this concept is clear, students. If you divide 1 by 1.10 raised to the power of 5, you shall be getting 0.621. So this is how we got 0.909, 0.826, 0.751, 0.683 and 0.621. So then if you multiply these factors with the respective terms, that is, because see, why are we multiplying it? Don't get confused. Many a times students get confused that when we are dividing it, then why do we need to multiply? Just to make this thing clear, I have elaborated these variables by writing 1000 into 1 upon 1.10 to the power of 1. It means what? 1000 I have taken out, and then 1000 needs to be multiplied by the reciprocal of 1.10 to the power of 1. That is 1 divided by 1.10, which will give us 0.901. So this 0.901 has to be multiplied by 1000 because the variable says 1000 into 1 upon 10. Therefore, in the same fashion, I have to multiply 1500 by 1.10 square, that is 0.826. So 0.826, where did I get the 0.826? 0.826 has been obtained by dividing 1 by the square of 1.10, and then this 0.826 is being multiplied by 1500 because the equation itself says 1500 multiplied by 1 by 1.10 square. This is a term which is being expressed by this particular equation, which says that 1500 into 1 upon 1.10 square. In the same fashion, we are multiplying 800. This 800 is being multiplied by 1 upon 1.10 cube, that is 0.751. So on and so forth. So once we are multiplying 1000 by 0.909, 1500 by 0.826, 800 multiplied by 0.751, 1100 multiplied by 0.683 and 400 multiplied by 0.621, then we shall be getting the present value of the future cash flow. So these are the present value factors. These are the present value factors which we obtained by dividing 1 by 1.10 to the power of 1, dividing 1 by 1.10 to the power of 2, dividing 1 by the cube of 1.10, dividing 1 by the 4 times of 1.10, and dividing 1 by 1.10 raised to the power of 5. So it is by undertaking that particular exercise that we obtained all these present value factors, and then we multiply these present value factors with the future cash flows which Mrs. Jenny is expected to earn. So the moment we multiply it, we are getting the present value of the future cash flows. So the moment we are multiplying these factors with the individual terms, we are getting the present value of the future individual cash flows for the next 5 years, which stands at 1000, 1500, 800, 1100 and 400. So then 1000 multiplied by 0.909 shall fetch us 909, plus 1500 into 0.826 shall give us 1239. 800 with 0.751 shall give us 600.8, and 1100 multiplied by 0.683 shall give us 751.3, and 400 with 0.621 shall be giving us 400. So the moment we sum it up all together, the moment we sum up or add up the individual present value of the future cash flows, we are getting the present value at 3,748.5 USD. So the present value of the future cash flows which Miss Jenny shall be receiving at the end of the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and the fifth year is the sum total of the present cash flows works out to be 3,748.5. So if against a required rate of return of 10%, so if Mrs. Jenny is putting up $3,748.5 at present if she is investing, she shall be entitled to receive these future cash flows out of the investments or as promised to her. Now students, let's talk about the second part. This was the first way by which we calculated these factors, that is 0.901, 0.826, 0.751, 0.683 and 0.61. Now let's go for a shorter approach. Now students, you will appreciate one thing, that over here the cash flows were smaller in number, the discount rate was quite a whole number 10%, and the number of years was less, that was only 5 years. So when all these variables are quite very benign and favorable, and the time frame is quite low, the discount rate is quite a whole number, and the future cash flows are quite small in number, over there we can undertake this particular lengthy exercise. But just imagine the condition wherein the future cash flows are a very complicated number and the n extends to 15 years, and this rate of discount, instead of 10%, this is 15% or 17% or 19%. Over there, undertaking this conceptual route shall be, again, it shall be very prone to errors, and it will be too very time consuming, and unnecessary a lot of effort shall be wasted. So in order to save ourselves from more practical conditions wherein the cash flow patterns are more erratic, where the cash flow amounts are not so very simple, where the n extends to 15, 17, 20 years, and where the discount rate is not such a simple number as 10%, it might be a complicated number, 17%, 19%. Over there, although correct, although conceptually sound, we cannot use such a lengthy computation, else we shall be unnecessarily running into a risk of getting a erroneous calculation. And student, as I've already said, the present value calculations, they are so important that there is a zero room for error, because a small error might reduce the future cash flows to a very wrong present value future, and if the finance manager is dealing with the wrong data, obviously it goes without saying that his financial decision will be absolutely inaccurate, which might create a financial disaster for the company which nobody can afford. So the better solution is that, again, we can refer to this particular variables or these present value from the present value of the lump sum tables. So we can refer to, we can also fetch these value in a straightforward fashion by referring to the present value of a lump sum table. Again, about this table we have already discussed at length. Let's have a quick recap of this fact. By looking across the present value of a lump sum table, we shall be getting the value of $1 or $1 of each dollar against a I% rate of interest for n number of years. So whatever n number of years we are trying to look at, whether it's 15 years, 20 years, no matter how longer the time frame is, and across any given rate of interest, we can easily pick up the required rate which we need as a present value for $1. We can pick up the rate from there, and we can simply multiply the given stream of the future cash flows with the rate which has been fetched from the present value of the lump sum tables. Just be careful, students. All the tables look very much identical to each other. Don't ever, even by mistake, don't refer to a future value table when you are required to refer to the present value table. Don't refer to the annuity tables if you are required to use the present value of the lump sum tables, and vice versa. Do not try to mix them up. In case of compounding, you're looking at the present value table, or in case of a lump sum, you're looking at the annuity table. The moment we make such errors, they no longer stay as errors. Rather, they take a they take a form of a blunder, and such blunders we cannot afford in the case of financial decision making area. So the tables, undoubtedly, they cut down our task. They make our task very, very easy. They make the entire process quite error free and quite simple. The only thing is that we have to exercise a lot of caution in using or picking up the appropriate table which is conceptually in consonance with the requirement of the question or the requirement of the condition. That's all for now, students. In the next illustration, we will try to understand that how exactly the tables are being used and how exactly the present value computation of a future stream of uneven cash flows can be used in case of taking a decision regarding a capital budgeting investment. Thank you, students. Happy learning.